Chapter 4. 13 Dawning Tide. The dire snake reared its massive head, its fangs glinting in the faint starlight, venom dripping in slow, syrupy beads that hissed when they hit the damp ground. Its scales gleamed wet and dark, and its golden eyes locked onto the trembling Sasquatch mother still tangled in its crushing coils. The young one stood nearby, wide-eyed and shaking, tiny fists clenched helplessly at his sides. I didn't hesitate. With a surge of quantum energy, I launched myself into the air, my force field flaring around me in a faint shimmer of light. The wind tore at my hair and clothing as I hurtled forward, fist cocked back. The blow struck the snake's lower jaw with bone-jarring force, and the sound echoed off the lake. Its head wasn't just snapped back. The force stretched its upper body as it slammed into the lake with a thunderous splash. Silence hung in the air briefly, broken only by the ripples spreading across the water's surface. But the Sasquatch woman was still trapped, her chest heaving in short, panicked gasps as the coils around her body constricted. Her eyes, wide, glassy, and full of fear, met mine. I dropped onto the thick, rippling coils of the snake's body, my boots sinking into its cold, muscular flesh. My fingers dug into the slippery scales as I pried the coils apart. Quantum energy surged through me, muscles straining as I poured every ounce of my enhanced strength into the task. The snake's tail came out of nowhere. It struck me like a battering ram, sweeping me off my feet and hurling me across the clearing. I slammed into a nearby boulder, the stone cracking under the impact. Pain blossomed across my back and shoulders, and for a moment the world tilted sideways. Dust and pebbles rained down around me as I gasped for air. Cian? Kip's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. His tiny silhouette darted overhead, wings buzzing in frantic patterns. Gritting my teeth, I pushed myself upright. The snake was thrashing now, its coils writhing and twisting in reaction to my earlier blow. But the Sasquatch woman, her face contorted in pain, was still trapped. Her child wailed from the shore, his cries sharp and desperate. I couldn't let this end here. Energy surged through me, bright and crackling, as I launched myself skyward again. Hovering above the snake's exposed side, I raised both hands, focusing every ounce of concentration on a single beam of razor-edged light. A narrow shaft of energy lanced from my fingertips, searing into the snake's armored flank. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and the creature let out a sound, a guttural, earth-shaking hiss of pain, as its coils momentarily slackened. I dove. With a burst of speed, I wrapped my arms around the Sasquatch woman's torso and pulled her free. Her body went limp in my arms, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I carried her toward the edge of the clearing, where Kip hovered anxiously. Stay with her. I barked as I set her down gently. Kip's wide eyes met mine and he nodded, his wings twitching nervously. I didn't waste time. I dashed back toward the wailing child, scooped him up in one arm and flew him to his mother's side. His tiny hands clung to my sleeve, his face buried in my shoulder, but he didn't make a sound as I sat him beside her. When I turned back, the snake had recovered. Its head was raised, swaying side to side like a cobra preparing to strike. Its golden eyes locked onto me, unblinking, full of cold malice. It struck. I shot skyward, my force field flickering under the force of the snake's attack as its fangs scraped against the shimmering energy protecting me. Venom sprayed from its mouth in hissing droplets, sizzling against the stones below. My force field was beginning to fail. I could feel the drain on my energy reserves, the strain tightening across my shoulders and spine. I had to adjust. I shifted my quantum reserves, pulling energy away from my force field and redirecting it into my personal durability. Durability was cheaper on my reserves than the force field as it wasn't spread out over a larger area. That freed up a little energy to go into my strength or my cutting beams. My strength was maxed out, so it went into the cutting beams. Come on, you overgrown garden hose, I muttered, hovering just out of reach. I fired another cutting beam, this time aiming for its head. The snake's instincts were sharp. It ducked low, its head snapping forward in a blur of motion. Its fangs struck home. Pain exploded across my chest as one of its venom-dripping fangs scraped against my hardened skin. My enhanced durability held, but just barely. I could feel the bruising starting to form deep beneath my skin. For a split second, the world went white with agony. Cian? Kip's voice cracked with panic. The flitter drake darted into the air, his wings glowing faintly as he uttered a series of sharp, chirping words. A cascade of shimmering lights, like a miniature aurora borealis, washed over the snake's head. Its golden eyes went wide, unfocused, and its movements slowed as it swayed in place. It was entranced. I seized the moment. With a twist of my body, I slipped deeper into the creature's gaping mouth, positioning myself directly beneath its skull. Quantum energy gathered at my fingertips, crackling and sparking in brilliant arcs. "Lights out," I growled. A focused beam of cutting energy shot upward, piercing through the snake's skull with surgical precision. The glow from my power flared bright, then dimmed. For a heartbeat everything went still. Then the snake collapsed. Its massive body fell in slow, rippling waves, its head hitting the ground with a resounding thud. The clearing went silent except for the sound of the wind rustling the treetops and the faint buzzing of Kip's wings. I pulled myself free of the creature's lifeless jaws, my chest heaving, my body trembling from exhaustion. We worked together, Kip and I, to drag the snake's massive corpse to the shore. With Kip's guidance, I made a makeshift stretcher from branches and leaves to carry the injured Sasquatch mother. The child clung to my side as we made the slow trek back to the Sasquatch tribe. When we arrived, the other Sasquatch emerged cautiously from the shadows. Their leader, a towering figure with gray streaks in his fur, stepped forward. Our eyes met, and without a word, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of gratitude, respect, and acknowledgement. No words were spoken. None were needed. Kip and I returned to the Pixie Grove later that evening. The pixies greeted us with hesitant smiles, their earlier distrust replaced by a sense of reverence. Kip looked up at me as we walked back to the ruins, his voice quiet. "You know, Glow Boy, you really are a hero." I smirked faintly, though my body ached from head to toe. "You can call me Cian, Kip. Or Glow Boy if you really want to." Kip's tail flicked. "Cian, huh? I think I can get used to that." I glanced down at my torn and stained suit. "And maybe it's time Kid Quantum took a break. Just for a while." Kip's wings buzzed as he flew up to my shoulder. "Fair enough, Cian." Together we walked into the deepening night. 13 to 21 dawning tide. The ruins were quiet under the night sky, flickering fire casting long shadows against the newly restored stone walls. The stars above twinkled like scattered shards of diamond, and the faint silver glow of the smaller moon azure was beginning to crest the horizon. Silva's, the larger moon, was hidden tonight, a perfect night for quiet introspection. I sat near the fire, legs stretched out, leaning back against a smooth chunk of salvaged granite. My Kid Quantum suit lay beside me in a rumpled heap, stained and torn from my fight with the dire snake. Kip perched on a cracked column nearby, his wings tucked close to his sides as he watched me with those sharp, jewel-bright eyes. "So," Kip said softly, his voice breaking the stillness. "What did you mean earlier? About hanging up Kid Quantum? Is that, like, your true name or something?" I sighed and ran a hand through my damp hair, feeling the weariness settle deep in my bones. "No, Kip. Kid Quantum isn't my real name, it's a persona, an alter ego. Back where I come from, heroes, people like me, often use names like that. They're masks, identities we can wear to protect ourselves and the people we care about." Kip's head tilted slightly, his wings twitching as he processed my words. "Protect from what?" "From enemies. From villains. From people who would hurt me by hurting the people I care about." I stared into the flickering firelight, my voice dropping lower. As Kid Quantum, I could stand in front of cameras, fight monsters, save lives, and the world would cheer. But as Cian McKendree? I could sit with friends, eat dinner with my family, and not have to look over my shoulder every second of every day. So why stop being Kid Quantum now? Kip asked quietly. "Because here it doesn't matter," I said, gesturing at the ruins around us, at the vast, untamed wilderness beyond. "No one knows Kid Quantum here. No one knows Cian McKendree either. It's all the same." I picked up the suit, holding it between my hands, the fabric catching faint glimmers from the firelight. "Maybe it's time to clean this thing and put it away. Or something more normal." Kip stayed quiet as I opened my pocket dimension, a swirl of shimmering light opening into a space only I could access. I entered and began pulling out clothes. Sturdy work pants, a soft gray t-shirt, a flannel button-up, fresh socks, underwear, and a pair of well-worn work boots. I also grabbed a towel and a bar of soap. Kip's head twitched curiously. "What's all that for?" "I'm going down to the river," I said, standing and slinging the towel over my shoulder. "I need a bath." "A bath? Now?" Kip's wings buzzed with incredulity. "Glow Boy, the river's freezing. Spring runoff has barely started. That water will be liquid ice." I shrugged. "Cold doesn't bother me much. Perks of being built like a walking battery." Kip snorted faintly but didn't argue further. "Well, try not to freeze your Glow Boy bits off then." I laughed softly and gave him a nod before heading down toward the riverbank. The forest was hushed under the starlit sky, and the path was easy to follow with my enhanced night vision. The river was exactly as Kip had described, clear, swift, and ice-cold as it rolled down from the higher elevations. I stripped down to nothing and waded into the water, sucking in a sharp breath as the cold bit into my skin. It was freezing, no doubt about it, but it felt cleansing in a way that went far deeper than just washing away sweat and grime. It felt symbolic, like I was shedding the remnants of Kid Quantum, scrubbing away the weight of past failures, fears, and regrets. I submerged myself fully, the river muffling every sound as I let the current pull lightly against me. When I resurfaced, I tilted my head back and looked up at the stars, feeling lighter and cleaner. When I was done, I dried off, combed my hair with my fingers, and dressed in the comfortable work clothes I'd brought. The flannel was warm against my skin, and the boots were sturdy underfoot. I felt different, not just clean but grounded, like stepping into something new. Back at the ruins, Kip was waiting by the fire. His head tilted as he saw me dressed in rugged, everyday clothing instead of the high-tech costume. "Well, look at you. You're almost blending in with the wilderness now." I grinned, shaking my head as I picked up the Kid Quantum suit. Holding it carefully, I focused my quantum energy on the suit. I pulled the water, sweat, grime, and even microscopic debris out of the fabric. The material gleamed faintly as it was restored to pristine condition. When I was done, I folded it carefully and stored it away in my pocket dimension. That's when the idea struck me. "Kip," I said slowly, "I think I've just figured out how I'm going to dry all that wood we cut." The next morning, after my usual sunbathing session high in the sky, Kip and I returned to the forest. True to their word, the pixies had marked the trees for cutting. Most of them matched what I would have chosen: overcrowded, dying, or poorly positioned, but a few were unexpected. Some were twisted, knotted, or partially hollow. Trees I would never have thought to use. But I realized something. The pixies weren't just thinking about me. They were thinking about the forest as a whole. Clearing these trees would help other ones grow stronger, straighter, and healthier. "All right, Foreman Kip," I said, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's get to work." I cut the marked trees close to the ground using precise beams of focused quantum energy. Each cut was clean and smooth, saving me hours of sanding later. I flew the logs back to the ruins one at a time, stacking them into organized piles to delimb and process later. Time compressed as I worked, hours blending into what felt like minutes. Kip buzzed nearby, shouting encouragement or sarcastic commentary whenever he felt the moment called for it. Every couple of hours, I paused to recharge in the sky, catching unfiltered sunlight far above the clouds. I felt sharp, focused, and ready for more when I landed again. By the end of the week, the logs were cut, stripped, and neatly stacked. I used the same quantum trick I'd used on my suit to slowly and evenly draw moisture out of the wood, effectively creating a makeshift kiln. The wood dried perfectly, straight, sturdy, and ready for construction. I had a different plan for the leftover, less usable wood: split rail fences. Instead of using post-hole diggers, I sharpened the ends of the posts and drove them deep into the ground with raw strength. I cut clean notches for the rails using my quantum lasers and assembled the fence in hours instead of days. When the sun dipped below the horizon at the end of that final day, Kip and I sat by the fire once again. "So, Cian," Kip said, perched on a stone nearby. "What's next?" I stared into the flickering flames, a satisfied smile tugging at my lips. "Next, we plant the garden." Kip nodded sagely, his tail flicking behind him. "Foreman Kip approves?" I laughed softly, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. For the first time since arriving here, I felt like I was building something worth holding on to. Something real. The fire crackled softly, throwing dancing shadows against the ancient stone walls of the ruins. The day's work was done, and the sky was painted in deep violet and fading orange hues as the sun dipped below the horizon. Stars began to emerge, scattered like frost across velvet, and the smaller moon, azure, hung low in the sky, casting its faint cerulean light. I sat cross-legged near the fire, a tin plate of food balanced on one knee. Steam rose from the meal: pan-fried fish, roasted root vegetables, and a handful of wild greens Kip had insisted were edible. Kip, perched atop a smooth stone nearby, gnawed delicately on a piece of roasted fish, his tiny wings tucked neatly against his sides. "So, Kip," I said between bites, trying to sound casual, "back when we fought the dire snake, what was that thing you did? The rainbow light trick that stunned it?" Kip perked up, his tail flicking excitedly. That was color spray." He gestured grandly with one tiny claw as though reenacting the spell in miniature. "A dazzling display of vibrant light and magic, perfectly tuned to overload the senses. Classic pixie magic, really? I grinned, amused by his theatrical flair. You sound pretty proud of it. Well, wouldn't you be? I saved your glowing backside, didn't I? Kip said with a toothy smirk. He settled back, wings fluttering slightly as he got comfortable. But color spray isn't the only trick up my scales. I've got a whole bag of magical goodies built into this little body. Oh yeah. I leaned forward, intrigued. Like what? With exaggerated flair, Kip cleared his throat and began listing his abilities, ticking them off on his claws. Animal growth, animate objects, animate rock, charm monster, commune with nature, dancing lights. Oh, you'd like that one. It's very dramatic. Detect magic, distance distortion, entangle, forget, ghost sound, glitter dust. Kip paused and wiggled his tail, sprinkling a few faint sparkles of light into the air. Hallucinatory terrain, invisibility, legend lore, limited wish. Though that one isn't effective as you might think. Mage hand, major image, mind fog, minor illusion, mirror image. Obscurement, obscuring mist, polymorph. He gasped theatrically. Project image, suggestion, summon nature's ally, tier 4, unseen servant, ventriloquism, and oh yes, water breathing. He finished with a dramatic bow. I blinked at him, trying to process the sheer scope of magic he had just rattled off. That's a lot of magic, Kip. Impressive, right? Kip said smugly, buffing one tiny claw against his chest. I'm basically a one-drake magical toolkit? I laughed and shook my head. You're telling me I'm basically in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign world, aren't you? Kip's head tilted. A what now? Dungeons & Dragons. A game where people pretend to be heroes and adventurers. You roll dice, tell stories, fight monsters, cast spells. Some of those names, color spray, mirror image, polymorph, are actual spells in the game. Kip's wings buzzed with excitement. You're saying humans have stories like this where you come from? Oh yeah, I said with a grin. I reached into my pocket dimension and pulled out a thick leather-bound book, Player's Handbook. See? It's all in here. Kip flew over, hovering near my shoulder as I flipped through the pages, pointing out spells and descriptions. His eyes were wide, his tail flicking eagerly as he absorbed every detail. Your world sounds wild, Glowboy. I mean Cian. Kip corrected himself quickly and I smirked. After a while, we fell into a comfortable silence, both staring into the fire. My eyes wandered across the cleared courtyard and the looming tower above us. There was so much left to do, yet I felt content in a way I hadn't felt in months. So, what's the plan for tomorrow, Cian? Kip asked. Well, I said, leaning back on my elbows. We're going to plant. But before we do that, we will need a greenhouse. A greenhouse? What's that? Kip tilted his head curiously. It's like a building made mostly of glass. It traps sunlight and heat, letting plants grow even when it is cold outside. There's plenty of sand down by the beach at the mouth of the river. I can turn that sand into glass. Kip's wings buzzed as he processed that. Wait, you can make glass? With my powers? Yeah. I'll show you when we're ready to build it. The following week passed in a blur of motion and focus. At dawn I rose, recharged in the sun's first light and set to work. With Kip buzzing beside me, we cultivated vast stretches of fertile land. I used steel plows and focused beams of quantum energy to break and aerate the earth. On the second day I pulled a trick I hadn't used often. Really, with 2 teammates I didn't need it for combat. As a kid I used it for more self-gratification-oriented pursuits, but after Jace, Ava and I got together I didn't need it for that either, so I tended to ignore it. Now though, it would come in handy. I created 2 duplicates of myself. They shimmered into existence, identical in every detail, moving with the same focus and precision as me. Glowboy, you are cheating, Kip said, staring at us with wide eyes. I grinned. Call it an efficient use of resources. With 3 of me working in tandem, progress exploded. We plowed fields for wheat, barley, oats, rye, and clover. Smaller, richer plots followed: potatoes, corn, beans, squash, kale, carrots, onions, garlic, peppers, herbs, rows upon rows of green potential spreading across the land. The orchard came next: apple, pear, peach, and plum trees planted in careful rows. Special plots were marked out for a future greenhouse, where I planned to grow orange and lemon trees, black pepper, coffee, sugar cane, and even watermelon. You're planting enough to feed an entire village, Cian, Kip said, hovering above me as I worked. Maybe someday it will feed a village, I replied, pausing to wipe sweat from my brow. When the last seed was planted and the orchards carefully arranged, I leaned on my shovel, surveying the fields bathed in the golden light of evening. A weight lifted off my shoulders, a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd felt before. Next, I said aloud, we'll need an apiary. Bees? Kip squeaked. Yup. And I was hoping maybe you and the pixies could help me find a hive or two. As twilight settled over the land, I stood at the edge of the fields taking in the sight. At the time I barely noticed it. I should have been paying better attention. A shadow lingered at the edge of the trees. Faint silver eyes glimmered briefly before the figure melted back into the foliage. The wind carried the scent of earth, growing things and faint magic for a moment. I felt like I was being watched, not with malice but with approval. Whatever was happening on this island, I was beginning to believe it was far bigger than me.